Duchess of Hamilton is one of the most iconic and distinct engines of the National Railway Museum. You will probably know it for its unique streamlined casing, which makes it stand apart from the other steam engines of the Great Hall. Yet the Duchess has much more behind it than just good looks. It comes from one of the most powerful classes of engine built in the UK. It visited America in disguise, it was saved from scrap by an unexpected benefactor, and it became the museum's star locomotive, pulling rail tours throughout the 80s and 90s. This is the story of 6229, the Duchess of Hamilton. The 1930s saw William Stanier brought on as the chief mechanical engineer of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. He was quick to make his mark, introducing the company's first Pacific locomotives, the Princess Royals. This class, introduced in 1933, was heavily influenced by the Great Western Railway's King class, as the engineer had been the works manager at Swindon before moving to the LMS. The Princess Royals, although suffering a few teething troubles, proved to be strong additions to the railway, hauling trains on the West Coast Main Line between London's Euston and Glasgow Central. In 1936, an order was put in for 5 more Pacifics from Crewe Works. Initially, Stanier was going to produce another batch of Princess Royals, but the Chief Technical Assistant of Derby Works, Tom Coleman, persuaded him that the railway needed a new, more powerful locomotive. As Stanier had been asked to aid railway development in India, Coleman was put in charge of the construction of this new class. The design was an improvement of the Princess Royals, increasing the size of the boiler, cylinders and driving wheels to give the engine more power. The tender included a steam-powered coal pusher, moving coal towards the cab to make it easier for the firemen to reach. As the design was nearing completion, however, an upset to the project came from the marketing department of the LMS. The London and North Eastern Railway had recently introduced a streamlined locomotive, the A4, running on the East Coast Main Line. The engine's unique shape had caught the attention of the public, and the LMS wanted their new design to capture this same magic. This posed a problem for Coleman, as his new design was already edging close to the maximum weight and size limits locomotives could be built to. But he persevered, eventually creating a lightweight casing that hugged the boiler closely. The rounded front meant the engine did not need extending, but was still able to incorporate Art Deco design principles to give the locomotive its unique and striking appearance. Coleman went above and beyond to please the marketing department. Even the headlamps took a stylised appearance. The first of the class, 6220 Coronation, rolled out of Crewe Works on the 1st of June 1937, painted in a unique Caledonian blue with silver speed stripes. With King George VI ascending to the throne, the design was officially named the Princess Coronation class, although it would come to be known as just Coronations. The locomotives were to pull the railway's new Euston to Glasgow train, the Coronation Scot, in order to compete with the LMS's own streamlined London to Scotland service, the Coronation. The coaches for the Coronation Scot were specially painted to match the engines, giving an impression of speed. At that time, the LMS's A4s held the steam speed record in the UK, with the first of the class, 2509 Silver Link, having reached a speed of 112.5 miles an hour. 6220 Coronation was due to pull a promotional train on the 29th of June, so it was decided an attempt would be made to take the record. The engine was driven by Tom J. Clark and fired by John Lewis, with Stanier's principal assistant Robert Riddles also on the footplate. The engine sped up once it started down Madley Bank towards Crewe, using the downward run to accelerate to a speed of 114 miles an hour. Coronation had claimed the speed record. However, the engine was then able to slow to a safe speed before reaching the points at Crewe, going over the 20 miles an hour section at 57 miles an hour. Thankfully, the train stayed on the rails, but it rattled the passengers and left the dining coach's crockery in pieces. The success of the first 5 locomotives led to the LMS ordering another 2 batches in 1938. It was decided to build 5 streamlined and 5 unstreamlined in order to ascertain how much the addition impacted the running of the engines. The final engine of the streamlined batch was 6229 Duchess of Hamilton, completed in September at Crewe, having cost £11,302 to build. These batches were given the more common LMS Crimson Lake livery, with the Streamliners having gold speed stripes running along their casing. In 1938, the unstreamlined Coronation 6234 Duchess of Abercorn hauled a pair of test trains, with the engine speed and power output recorded using a dynamometer car. The first run showed the engine struggling on the many gradients of the West Coast main line, so the engine was given a double chimney to increase steam exhaust and allow the boiler to exert more power. This proved a major success, as when climbing the Shap and Beatock inclines, 2,511 horsepower was recorded on the coupling between the engine and train. This roughly equates to 3,333 horsepower being exerted by the engine cylinders, the highest recorded power output from a British steam engine. It was 1 year later that 6229 got its chance to shine, but not as Duchess of Hamilton. 6220 Coronation was invited to the New York World's Fair, which the LMS gladly accepted. But, not wanting to put the first of the class at risk, they had the engine swap nameplates and numbers with Duchess of Hamilton. Neither engine was repainted, although a set of Coronation Scott coaches was decorated in a unique Crimson Lake with gold lining livery to match the engine. Duchess of Hamilton was given a headlamp and bell to comply with American safety regulations before being sent off from Southampton docks. The engine was unloaded at Baltimore, with the freezing conditions giving the tour an ill start. The assigned driver caught pneumonia, leading to the fireman being promoted to driving while Robert Riddles fired the engine. Further issues were found with the American coal, much smaller than that from Britain. This led to it not only burning faster, requiring more work from Riddles, but also hotter, which damaged the firebox to the point parts needed replacing along the journey. Despite this, the engine was able to keep to time, finishing the 3,121 mile tour by the 14th of April, when it pulled into New York. Here, the Duchess was displayed alongside American locomotives, including Streamliners. As the Duchess was one of Britain's largest, it really puts into perspective the size difference between engines of the two countries. The Duchess's return home was delayed by the outbreak of World War II, with concerns about the engine's safety, as well as a shortage of shipping space. It was stored at Baltimore until 1943, when it was finally able to make the voyage home, landing in Cardiff. After being given an overhaul, including the addition of a double funnel, the engine was returned its name and number, running as 6229 Duchess of Hamilton once again. 1 year later, the engine was repainted into a plain black livery, which it kept for the rest of the war. The final streamlined Coronation, 6248 City of Leeds, was completed in 1943. The other 4 members of this batch had also been intended to be streamlined, with the tenders having been built to streamlined form. It had been an unusual choice for the LMS to have kept the streamlining during the war, as it made maintenance on the engines harder. Indeed, after the war, the LMS made the decision to remove the streamlining of the whole class, starting with 6235 City of Birmingham. Duchess of Hamilton had its streamlining removed in December of 1947, being painted into LMS lined black and given smoke deflectors. The ex-streamlined engines could be differentiated from the non-streamlined members of the class by the sloped smoke box, which had been shaped to fit beneath the streamlined casing. These engines were referred to as semi-streamlined or just semis, although they would lose this distinctive feature through overhauls, with 6229 losing its semi-smoke box in February of 1957. Another difference was that non-streamlined Coronations had a curved footplate at the front, while the ex-streamlined examples skipped this in favour of a gap between the layers that gave better maintenance access to the cylinders. The utility front end, as it came to be known, was later built onto new members of the class, starting with 6253 City of St Albans. 1948 saw the LMS become a part of British Railways under nationalisation, bringing Britain's railway network under the control of the government. As part of the railway's new numbering system, Duchess of Hamilton became number 4 6229. It was repainted into Express Blue in April of 1950, then repainted again into Brunswick Green in April of 1952, the only livery all members of the Coronation class shared. 1948 was also notable for seeing the first release of a Princess Coronation model, with Hornby 00 releasing 6231 Duchess of Atholl, one of the non-streamlined Duchesses, for their free-rail system. However, this model was intended to release in 1939 and had been given a number of advertisements before production stopped due to the war. In 1957, the London Midland region of British Railways introduced a new train, the Caledonian. This effectively replaced the Coronation Scot, which had not run since the beginning of the war. It ran from Euston to Glasgow with a single stop at Carlisle. Duchess of Hamilton was selected to pull the first train on the 15th of June, leaving Euston to a chorus of bagpipes and running at an average speed of 61 miles an hour. 1958 saw the engine repainted into maroon, giving the engine a more classic LMS appearance. Despite this, the end was closing in for the Duchesses. British Railways had begun its modernisation plan, replacing steam traction with diesel and electric. The West Coast Main Line had been electrified from London to Crewe, and diesels began being introduced to run trains along the rest of the line. The Duchesses were given yellow stripes across their cabside, indicating that the engines were not allowed to go beneath the electrical wires south of Crewe. By 1961, the Princess Royals had begun to be withdrawn, and the Coronation started being removed from service in 1962. Duchess of Hamilton stayed until February of 1964, having travelled 1,517,250 miles in service. By the end of September, only one member of the class remained. 46256 Sir William A. Stanier was retained to pull a final rail tour on the 26th of September, named the Scottish Lowlander. It pulled the train from Crewe to Carlisle, where A4 locomotive 6007 Sir Nigel Gresley took it on to Edinburgh. There had been a bid to preserve that final coronation, but the buyer was unable to come up with the money in time, so the engine was, unfortunately, broken up. By this time, it seemed only one coronation would be preserved. 46235 City of Birmingham had been promised to the Birmingham Museum of Science and Industry, representing the city's ties to the railway industry. An extension had to be built to house the engine, with City of Birmingham taking its place in 1966. The museum would close in 1997, with the locomotive being moved to the new Think Tank Museum, where it remains today, the only example of a coronation untouched since service. When all hope seemed lost for Duchess of Hamilton, salvation would come from an unlikely source: Billy Butlin, who owned multiple holiday camps across the UK. He had been persuaded that steam engines would be a valuable attraction for visitors, and as such, searched for a deal. He initially went after the first A4 locomotive, 60014 Silver Link, but the Eastern region gave too high a price. It was the same on the Western region, where he attempted to buy 6018 King Henry VI. The London Midland region proved much more reasonable, with Duchess of Hamilton being bought after it was found the engine had visited America. The pleasantry of the sale led to Butlin purchasing more large engines from the region, including 46233 Duchess of Sutherland. Duchess of Hamilton was restored at Crewe Works before being sent to the Minehead holiday camp, being put in place on the 3rd of May. It was positioned next to a play area alongside Knoll, a Southern Region A1 Terrier locomotive, where it would stay for the next 10 years. Although the engines were initially successful, by 1971 their popularity was dwindling. The Bressingham Steam Museum approached Butlin's, wanting to loan their engines to restore and display. A deal was made for 4 of Butlin's engines, although the other 4, including Duchess of Hamilton, had already been promised for display during the 1971 season. It wasn't until 1975 that the engine left, with a 20-year loan agreement from a high-profile museum that was preparing to open its doors, the National Railway Museum. Duchess of Hamilton was taken to Swindon Works to be cosmetically restored to its as-withdrawn condition, being painted in British Railways maroon with number 46229. It was ready by 1976, being unveiled in the museum's Great Hall on the 26th of May. The 46229 was well received as a display piece and quickly became one of the museum's star attractions. Thoughts soon turned to having the engine re-steamed. Duchess of Sutherland, which had been in steam at Bressingham, failed in 1976 and wasn't able to be repaired, so there was a gap the museum could fill. The fundraising campaign was led by the Friends of the National Railway Museum, with the efforts including a painting of the Duchess made by Terence Cuneo. The overhaul began in 1978, taking 2 years to complete. The Duchess was first steamed on the 14th of April 1980 and was cleared to pull its first rail tour on the 10th of May. The limited edition, as the train was called, saw the engine pulling a circular train from York, travelling through Leeds and Harrogate. It was the first time a Coronation had pulled a mainline train since 46256 Sir William A. Stanier pulled the Scottish Lowlander 16 years prior, and the engine needed little encouragement to reach the 60 miles an hour speed limit it was restricted to. The return to steam came just in time for the Duchess to be a part of the Rocket 150 parade, celebrating the anniversary of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway between the 24th and 26th. The Duchess proceeded to pull rail tours regularly and without difficulty. The 1st of November saw the engine's first rail tour on the Settle Carlisle Railway, which it would visit often. A rivalry developed between crews here, with an unofficial competition for the fastest time from a standing start at Appleby up the southbound line, with the time taken between Ormside Viaduct and the summit of Isgill. The time was reduced from 19 minutes and 51 seconds to 17 minutes and 57 seconds in only a few months. To celebrate this, a blue ribbon was attached to the front of the engine by its driver. In 1981, a rail charter was made to commemorate the reopening of the Scarborough Spar, a building dating to the 17th century that had been restored. Duchess of Hamilton was chosen to pull the first Scarborough Spar Express, a charter train that continues operating to this day. By 1985, mechanical issues started to reveal themselves, and it was clear the engine would need a heavy overhaul, the likes of which it had not seen since 1959. After pulling the Cumbrian Mountain Express on the 26th of October, the Duchess was withdrawn from service and sent for its overhaul. During this time, in 1987, the engine was fully purchased from Butlins, officially entering the ownership of the National Railway Museum. The overhaul took 5 years to complete, with the Duchess returning to steam on the 29th of March 1990, hauling a test train from Derby to Sheffield before returning to regular rail tours. As with many of the other museum engines, 1991 saw Duchess of Hamilton make an appearance in the Railway series book, Thomas and the Great Railway Show. In 1993, Duchess of Hamilton was once again running on the Settle Carlisle Railway, although this time competition came from other engines. Inspired by the Duchess's runs in the 1980s and given the title the Blue Riband, the engines were unofficially pitted against each other for the fastest time, with the same rules, starting at Appleby and timed between Ormside Viaduct and Isgill Summit. Other engines competing included 71000 Duke of Gloucester and 60532 Blue Peter, but it was the Duchess who would take the crown. On the 24th of April, 46229 reached the summit with a time of 16 minutes and 14 seconds, which is still yet to be beaten, although Duke of Gloucester did come close in 1994 with a time of 16 minutes and 20 seconds. The privatisation of the railways, starting in 1994, gave rail tour operators greater freedom when it came to where steam engines could be run. So, in 1995, Duchess of Hamilton returned to its old stomping grounds on the West Coast Main Line. As this route also had various inclines, competition was sparked once again, although this time in a more official manner. 3 trains, named the Shap Time Trials, were organised between the 30th of September to the 3rd of October for Duchess of Hamilton, Duke of Gloucester and 6007 Sir Nigel Gresley. Duke of Gloucester proved to be the best on the inclines, going up Shap in 6 minutes and 27 seconds, while Sir Nigel Gresley completed the route in the fastest overall time, excluding stops, of 2 hours and 45 minutes. Duchess of Hamilton was no slouch, however, reaching the peak of Shap only 22 seconds behind 71000 and completing the journey in 2 hours and 49 minutes. The Duchess's boiler certificate expired in 1996, preventing 46229 from continuing to run on Britain's main lines. Its final rail tour was on the last weekend of November, pulling the Royal Scot. On the 30th, the engine pulled a train from Euston to Glasgow Central, and the 31st saw the train taken on to York, where the engine was retired from mainline duty. The Duchess spent the next year operating on different heritage lines before settling in on the East Lancashire Railway from 1998. Here, the Duchess was repainted into its old BR Brunswick green livery. However, as with all good things, it had to come to an end. A cosmetic restoration saw the Duchess given back its BR maroon livery, and the engine was returned to the National Railway Museum's Great Hall as a static exhibit. Despite being taken out of service, work was being done to revitalise Duchess of Hamilton. In order to make it stand out from the other two coronations, a proposal was made to restore the engine to its original condition, streamlined in LMS Crimson Lake. With the intention of restoring the Duchess to working order, a deal was made with the luxury charter company Venice Simplon Orient Express. The company wanted a prestigious-looking engine to head their trains in the north, with the intention of painting a set of coaches to match. A deal was made with VSOE in 1999, which saw them paying for a thorough inspection of the locomotive to see what would need repairing. But, as it seemed 6229 was set to get back on track, disaster struck. On the 5th of October, a Class 165 diesel overran a red signal and collided with a high-speed train at Ladbroke Grove, starting a fire and leading to the deaths of 31 people, with 417 more injured. Until the accident report was released, the long-term effects on the railways, and steam engines in particular, was uncertain. VSOE assumed that engines would have to be overhauled with new automatic train protection systems installed, an expensive ask. By the following March, they had abandoned the project. But the NRM wasn't done with streamlining yet. In 2004, they approached Steam Railway magazine with a new goal: cosmetic restoration. The engine would take its old shape, but it would be kept on static display. With awareness gained through the magazine, £25,000 were raised for the project. Before the restoration started, 6229 was brought to crew for an open weekend held on the 10th and 11th of September 2005. This event saw 4 of the 5 surviving LMS Pacifics reunited: Duchess of Hamilton, Duchess of Sutherland, Princess Margaret Rose and Princess Elizabeth. It was the first time since the early 60s, when all were based at Camden Shed, that they had been together, and it would be the last chance for the public to see 6229 for a while. When the weekend was over, Duchess of Hamilton was taken to Tyseley Locomotive Works to begin its restoration. Thanks to the inspection paid for by VSOE, the early stages of the restoration went quickly. The 6th of May saw the engine displayed to those who had donated over £150, who got to see a semi-streamlined Duchess for the first time since the 50s. The engine was painted into LMS black, although only on its left side. Its right remained maroon. After this point, work began to slow. Many crucial drawings for the casing had been lost to time, and due to the engine's many overhauls, it was unlikely the mounting point and other parts would have matched anyway. Nonetheless, work continued through 2007, with the streamlining starting to be applied. But then, the project hit a major roadblock. The casing needed steel sheets of particular measurements to be completed. The research had been ongoing throughout the project, but the only sources found had to be obtained in bulk orders that would leave more sheets than the museum could ever use. The overhaul was put on hold for a year, until higher-ups in the government were made aware of the plight. Not long after, a special batch was commissioned, and with another fundraising push to cover the extra costs, the project was finally able to be completed. On the 18th of May 2009, the Duchess was returned to the National Railway Museum, where preparations were being made for the engine's unveiling. A Streamliner exhibition had been set up, with a Chrysler Airflow C1 also on display. The public was allowed its first look at the engine on the 23rd. Duchess of Hamilton was back. It was given great attention again in 2011, when it was exhibited outside for the museum's LMS weekend. It would also visit Shildon's Locomotion Museum between 2012 and 2013, before being returned to its place in York's Great Hall, where it has remained ever since. Duchess of Hamilton is a staple of the National Railway Museum, one of its most recognisable engines, and is often on display next to the Great Hall's other streamliner, Mallard. But it is more than just second fiddle to the world's fastest engine. Coming from a mighty class of locomotive, it showed its strength not just in service, but prevailed against other preserved engines. It is one of the few British locomotives to visit America, narrowly avoided the cutter's torch through the help of a holiday company, and spent the 80s and 90s as one of the strongest and most iconic preservation engines. And now, clad in its distinct streamlining, the Duchess is a reminder of the glory days of steam, when railways were powerful and prestigious.